So we've had another expose regarding these young girls and these Muslim grooming, raping and prostituting gangs. That prostituting is very important. What was her name? Lisa Agolier, the young girl. We saw also the pictures of her, lovely, bright-eyed, red-haired girl. She was injected with heroin as she was being prostituted by these Muslim gangs, and died. Died at the age of 15, I think. And this has left an open sore. I mean, her grandmother has been trying to get justice for her for a number of years. It's left an open sore in Manchester, and it meant that the police were under scrutiny, under the microscope. And why didn't they intervene to protect this girl? They knew she was being prostituted out to older men. They knew she was being pumped with heroin. They knew her life was in jeopardy. And it's the role of the police to protect and save the public. That's their first role. Why didn't they intervene to protect this girl? And we know the reason why now. They were afraid to agitate the Muslim community and to irritate the native British community. They were taking secondary considerations into. They were making them primary. They were making them the most important issue. Why were they doing that? Why were they so interested in the social ramifications of investigating and solving crimes? That's not the role of the police. That's the role of the politicians. And this is the key to this whole fiasco, this whole horrific story of this mass abuse of our young kids by these Muslim gangs. It was the politicians. It was the politicians who were making the choices and who were imposing their will upon the police. We know that Jackie Smith, the Home Secretary under Gordon Brown, sent a memo to the North West Police Forces and Crown Prosecution Service to say that these young girls knew what they were involved with, and that the police should keep their distance and not get involved. Not get involved. Isn't this nice, gentle, soothing language? They know what they're involved in. Young girls. How young? Some of them were as young as 12. These girls were being sexually abused in horrific ways by gangs of Muslim men. They'd been groomed. They'd hung around takeaways, or the Muslim men had been taxi drivers ferrying them from children's homes, and they got to know them and they gave them gifts and they made them feel special. Then they invited them into situations where they could be plied with drink and raped, and then once they were raped, they were captured and they were part of these prostitution networks. They were sold to other Muslim men within the Pakistani community. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim men across the nation were using these child prostitutes. And it was a lot of money involved. If you think a child prostitute, she could be forced to have sex with maybe 20 men a night at £30 a go. We're looking at, how much we're looking at there? £600 a night, 5 nights a week. It's £3,000 a week. 50 weeks a year. It's £150,000 one girl. They were doing this to hundreds of thousands of English girls. This was a financial operation. This was a classic criminal operation. The police knew all about it, and so did the politicians. And yet, they were allowed to do it. Now, the politicians had to talk about cultural sensitivities. You see, these men who'd come in from Pakistan, some of them had only just arrived in Britain. Some of them had been here a while. Some of them had been born here. But they all shared the same culture. In Pakistan, there's no age of consent. They live according, basically, to Sharia law. And Muhammad is their example. And we know that Muhammad had what he called thigh sex with his 6-year-old concubine, Aisha. He ejaculated on her thighs when she was 6 years old. Now just imagine a child, a young female girl of 6. You know, they're sweet, they're innocent, they're sensitive. They're being used for sex by old men. By Muhammad himself. And at the age of 9, he penetrated Aisha. 9-year-old girl, just imagine that. A 9-year-old child penetrated by an older man. But he's their example. In Pakistan, when they've tried to introduce to politicians an age of consent, maybe 12, you're not allowed to have penetrative sex with a 12-year-old kid, there's been an uproar against that. It's called blasphemy. The imams and the mullahs have said it's blasphemy to say that you've got an age of consent of 12. This is the culture these people come from. And of course, they're dealing there with Muslim girls. Now, the Tory sort of leader in the House of Lords, I forget her name, she said that it wasn't a case of Muslim men exploiting English girls. They were exploiting vulnerable girls. Yes, they were, but they were not exploiting vulnerable Muslim girls. It was targeted. It was racially and culturally targeted against English girls. And this was all to be expected. When you bring a totally alien culture into a host country, it creates all sorts of frictions, all sorts of problems. And it's our children who paid the price. And the police, the role the police played in this whole stink, this whole odious fiasco is horrendous. The police knew what was going on. They had the information on the ground. They knew who they could arrest. They knew they could build a case, but they said, we lacked resources. They didn't lack resources. That's a lie. They always had resources to combat racism. And this is the key word, racism. It became a weaponized word to destroy white people. If white people stood up to defend their own, to defend what's theirs, they were racist, and therefore the police stood back. And even worse than that, the police were proactive in arresting fathers, brothers, uncles, friends who tried to protect these girls. The police were complicit in this whole horrendous criminal enterprise. The British police, once the pride of the world, we used to call the British police force the best police force in the world, was complicit in the most abominable crime that's taken place in this nation ever. It's a crime parallel to the Holocaust against the Jews in Nazi Germany. This is a mass abuse of maybe Sarah Champion, the Labour MP, who investigated thoroughly, said to up to 1 million English children. And just as the Germans looked the other way while the Nazis were persecuting the Jews, so many people and agencies in British society looked the other way. We're still covering up now. We need a public inquiry into what happened. We need a full expose of this whole horrendous fiasco. We've got to, the truth has got to come out. The real nature and scale of this abuse of our children has to be told. It's a stain on our nation. It's a reproach to the British nation. How did we allow this to happen? I mean, I'm talking about young girls dying due to injections with heroin. They were sodomised by these men. They suffered gang rape, multiple gang rape. They suffered horrendous abuse. They were plied with so much drink they didn't know how many men were having sex with them in one night. And they're scarred for life by that. You know, many of them had to have multiple abortions. Many of them have got mental health issues now. I mean, we could talk about Charlene Downs, the kid from Blackpool. She was raped and abused by a Muslim gang who then boasted of killing her, chopping her up and putting her in a kebab. And the police had this on a recording. But because they took the recording illicitly and supposedly illegally, they had to drop the case and they had to compensate the Muslim gang £250,000, £250,000 for the brutal raping and murder of an English girl, Charlene Downs. These are just, there was more, there was thousands more. name after name, city after city. Keighley in Yorkshire. They were going to make a documentary about Keighley in Yorkshire and the abuse that was going on there, but the police stopped them. Marlene Guest in Rotherham. She built up a dossier of all the crimes against the children that she found out. She got names, she interviewed the kids, any information she got, she put it down on record, and eventually she exposed what was going on in Rotherham. What these gangs were up to, and the police couldn't silence her. And then other members of the police force, like Maggie Oliver in Manchester, blew the whistle. Their conscience couldn't hold what was happening anymore. They had to tell the general public. They put their lives and they put their careers on the line. And of course there were politicians, people in the nationalist community, this sort of nationalist subculture in our nation. They were speaking about it. I remember Nick Griffin going to court, Mark Collett going to court. I've been to court, Tommy Robinson's been to court, Paul Golding's been to court. Patriots, people who cared about our children and who were willing to speak out. The police persecuted them because the politicians wanted that done. The police have behaved like the whores of the politicians. They've done the bidding of the politicians. And there's no excuse. They're not there to save evil people. They're there to save the British public. Something's happened. Something's rotten in our police force. I mean, when I was arrested for fighting these Muslim grooming gangs, I asked the police officers, I said, do you believe in God? And you know what? They froze, or they laughed, they mocked. No, they didn't believe in God. They didn't believe in right and wrong, and they were quite willing to do what was wrong. And they've got to be called to account for that, because this has been criminal behaviour by the police, criminal negligence. And I'm not stopping at the police. The social workers were in it right up to their neck. They knew these girls were being taken to be prostituted, and they didn't intervene. They reckon 17 government agencies knew exactly what was happening, knew the scale, knew the nature of the abuse, and they refused to take action. The politicians themselves, it's got to go all the way up to the top, to the Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, who was acting on orders from Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. They knew what was happening in this nation. They knew about this criminal, vile abuse of our children. And they sanctioned it. And they've got to be called to account. What was going on? And it wasn't until Labour got voted out in 2010 when Theresa May became the Home Secretary and she said, I'm not going to tolerate this. And good on her for that. Good on her. She said, these girls have been cast onto the rubbish tip of life because somehow they're socially, of lower worth. We can't accept that. We can't accept what's gone on. We've got to bring closure on this issue. We've got to recognise that we have an ongoing threat in this society to our children, because it hasn't stopped. It's still going on now. And it's not just in Britain. In France, Arab gangs have been doing it. In Italy, black Muslim gangs have been doing it. In Germany, Turkish gangs have been doing it. In Sweden, all sorts of Somalis. I mean, Jesse Henner, the Finnish MP, who leads the Finnish party, the Finns, the True Finns, he based his whole electoral campaign on fighting Somali grooming gangs in Finland. And he was threatened and attacked and taken to court by the politicians and police there. It's happened right across Europe. There's something wrong. There's a cultural clash here. The invaders are not coming to fit into our norms, and they're not coming to respect us. They're coming to abuse us in the most vile manner. And it's unacceptable. The people who are supposed to be the guardians of our children and our nations have failed abysmally. They should be rejected totally. They should be prosecuted, and they should be punished. Thank you.